The signal came from the outer edge of the galaxy where most civilized beings never bothered to look, and Ambassador Zexthul of the Vortani Empire found himself staring at yet another primitive species request for membership in the Galactic Council, which happened about twice every solar cycle and usually ended with the same boring rejection letter. The transmission quality was terrible and full of static noise that hurt his sensitive hearing organs, but the message was clear enough in broken Galactic Standard Language, and he could make out the basic words requesting peaceful contact and something about joining the galactic community, which made him roll all four of his eyes in annoyance. These creatures called themselves humans and came from a small blue planet they named Earth, in some backwater solar system that barely registered on any star charts, and Zexthul pulled up their preliminary data scan, which showed a species that had only just figured out basic space travel, and were still using primitive chemical rockets to move between their own planetary bodies. The report made him laugh, which sounded like grinding metal to most species, and he saw that these humans had no energy shields protecting their vessels, and no plasma weaponry systems, and their fastest ships could barely reach a fraction of light speed, which meant they were thousands of years behind current galactic technology. Standards Council member Kira Len from the Crystalline Collective materialized beside his desk in a shower of blue light particles, and her crystalline form chimed softly as she spoke about the human transmission that had reached her department as well. And she seemed mildly curious about some of the strange terms the humans kept using in their military assessment reports. She mentioned that the humans appeared obsessed with something they called combined arms tactics and kept referencing logistics systems and supply chain management, which were concepts that most galactic civilizations had abandoned centuries ago when they developed instant matter transportation and energy synthesis technology. Zexthul brought up the human military structure on his holographic display, and both council members stared at the primitive organizational charts that showed millions of individual soldiers divided into units with strange names like battalions and divisions and brigades, which seemed unnecessarily complex when most advanced species simply fielded their champion warriors. In small elite groups, the humans also submitted detailed reports about something called industrial capacity and manufacturing capabilities, which included vast factories that produced weapons and vehicles and equipment using raw materials and manual labor instead of the standard energy conversion systems that any civilized species would use. Kira Len noted that the humans seemed to have an unusual approach to warfare based on large numbers of regular troops working together, rather than the typical galactic method of sending forth elite champions with advanced personal shields and plasma weapons to engage in honorable single combat or small unit tactical operations. The council meeting was scheduled for the next rotation, and Zexthul already knew how the vote would go, because every primitive species got the same standard treatment, which involved sending an evaluation fleet to assess their military capabilities and determine if they posed any threat to galactic stability or if they had anything useful to contribute to the greater civilization. He prepared the standard paperwork for a Class 7 evaluation, which involved 12 mid-level patrol ships and a basic combat assessment protocol that would test the species' ability to defend themselves and demonstrate their most advanced military technologies and tactical capabilities. The humans would be given standard notification that a Galactic Council evaluation fleet was approaching their system, and they would have one local rotation period to prepare their finest military demonstration, which usually meant showing off their best champion warriors and most impressive weapons systems. Captain Jake Morrison of the UES Liberty received the transmission while orbiting Earth's moon during a routine patrol mission, and he immediately contacted command headquarters to report that humanity had just made official first contact with an alien civilization that wanted to test their military strength. The message was clear even through the translation difficulties, and it stated that 12 alien ships would arrive at the edge of human space in exactly 30 Earth days, and humanity would need to demonstrate their military capabilities to prove they were Worthy of joining something called the Galactic Council, Morrison read the transmission 3 times to make sure he understood correctly and then activated emergency protocols to notify every major government and military installation on Earth. That first contact had been established and that humanity was about to face its first galactic military evaluation. The alien message included basic technical specifications for the evaluation process, which would involve simulated combat scenarios, using holographic targets and energy constructs designed to test human tactical abilities and weapons effectiveness without causing actual casualties or damage to either side. General Lisa Hayes received the notification at NORAD headquarters and immediately began coordinating with military leaders from every major nation on Earth, because this was clearly a situation that required the full cooperation of all human military forces working together as a unified response team. The evaluation would determine whether humanity was accepted into galactic civilization or rejected as too primitive and potentially quarantined to their home system for the next 1,000 years, until they developed more advanced technologies and proved they could meet galactic standards for military effectiveness. Hayes looked at the technical requirements and realized that humanity was about to face the most important test in their entire history, and everything depended on making a good impression on aliens who clearly had technology far beyond anything humans had ever imagined. The 12 alien ships appeared at the edge of human space exactly when they said they would, and their vessels looked like nothing humanity had ever seen, with smooth curves and glowing energy fields that made human starships look like crude metal. Boxes held together with bolts and prayers, Fleet Commander Veltar stood on the bridge of his flagship and observed the primitive solar system through advanced sensors that could detect every human vessel and installation with perfect clarity. And he felt the familiar boredom that came with evaluating another backward species that would probably fail the basic requirements. His communication officer established contact with the human military command structure, and Veltar began transmitting the standard evaluation protocols using the universal translator, which converted his thoughts into the crude human language system that relied on sound vibrations and mouth movements. The humans responded from a location they called NORAD, which appeared to be buried deep underground on their home planet. And a female voice identified herself as General Lisa Hayes, who would be coordinating humanity's demonstration of military capabilities for the Galactic Council evaluation, Veltar explained. The testing procedures, which involved deploying holographic combat scenarios where humans would face simulated enemy forces using energy constructs and phantom targets designed to test their tactical thinking and weapons effectiveness without any real danger to either side. The evaluation would measure human military doctrine and individual warrior capabilities, and advanced technology integration, and strategic planning abilities, and any species that failed to meet minimum galactic standards would be rejected for membership and potentially restricted from expanding beyond their home system. General Hayes acknowledged the instructions and requested permission to deploy human forces to the designated testing area, which was a large, empty region of space near the outer planets, where the holographic battlefield could be safely established without interference from civilian populations. Colonel Ryan Brooks received orders to lead the human demonstration forces, and he selected what he considered a standard mixed unit consisting of regular infantry with basic equipment and standard vehicles and normal support personnel that any human military would deploy for a typical operation. The alien observers watched through their advanced sensors as human ships approached the testing zone, and Veltar noted with disappointment that the vessels appeared to be simple transport craft with basic metal armor and primitive chemical propulsion systems that would be completely useless in real galactic warfare. The humans began deploying their forces, and Veltar expected to see the usual arrangement of elite champion warriors with personal energy shields and advanced plasma weapons, and maybe some exotic technology that would make the evaluation interesting for once. Instead, he observed hundreds of identically equipped soldiers carrying simple projectile weapons and wearing basic protective gear that would not stop even the weakest energy blasts, and they moved in large, coordinated groups rather than as individual champions seeking glorious combat. Sub-Commander Thexra reported that the humans were requesting information about supply lines and logistics support and asking strange questions about ammunition resupply and medical evacuation procedures and field maintenance capabilities, which seemed completely irrelevant to a combat demonstration. The holographic battlefield activated and created a variety of enemy targets, including simulated alien warriors and defensive positions and mobile threats that would test different aspects of military capability, and the aliens waited for the humans to charge forward with their champion fighters. Colonel Brooks established what he called a command post and began coordinating with various unit leaders using primitive radio communications, and the humans started doing something the aliens had never seen before, which involved careful planning and resource allocation and detailed tactical discussions. The human soldiers did not immediately attack the holographic enemies, and instead, they spent time observing the battlefield and discussing approach routes and establishing something they called fields of fire, and setting up support positions for their primitive weapon systems. Veltar grew impatient and transmitted a message asking when the human champions would begin their combat demonstration and why the soldiers were wasting time with unnecessary preparations instead of engaging the enemy targets in honorable battle. General Hayes responded that the humans were conducting standard pre-combat operations and would begin the assault phase once proper reconnaissance and tactical planning were completed, which confused the alien observers, who had never encountered such methodical approaches to warfare. The humans finally began their attack, and instead of individual champions charging forward, they moved in coordinated groups with some soldiers providing covering fire, while others advanced, and they used primitive tactics like flanking maneuvers and suppressing fire to overwhelm the holographic enemies. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Turner coordinated what the humans called combined arms operations, where different types of units worked together in ways that seemed unnecessarily complex compared to the simple champion versus champion combat that most galactic species preferred. Sergeant First Class Ben Carter led a squad through tactical movements that involved careful timing and communication and mutual support, and the aliens watched in bewilderment as these ordinary soldiers achieved victory through teamwork rather than individual prowess. The holographic targets were designed to test elite warriors with advanced personal shields and exotic weapons, but the humans defeated them using mass coordination and simple projectile weapons and tactical planning that treated warfare as a group effort rather than individual competition. Veltar found himself staring at combat reports that showed impossible results where primitive soldiers with basic weapons had achieved tactical objectives that should have required advanced champions with energy shields and plasma rifles and personal force fields. The evaluation. Parameters had never accounted for this type of military doctrine where large numbers of regular troops worked together as coordinated units, and the alien computers were having difficulty processing the concept of mass infantry tactics and combined arms operations. Sub-Commander Thexra noted that the humans kept referring to the demonstration forces as standard units and regular troops and basic infantry, which implied that what they were observing was not humanity's elite military capability, but rather their normal everyday soldiers. This observation created a disturbing possibility that the Galactic Council had never encountered before, and Veltar began to wonder if humanity's true military strength was far greater than what they were currently demonstrating. Fleet Commander Veltar transmitted an urgent message to the Human Command Center because the evaluation results made no sense according to standard galactic military doctrine, and he needed to understand why humanity was holding back their true champion warriors from the combat demonstration. General Hayes responded from her underground facility and confirmed that the human forces currently engaged in the testing scenarios represented standard military units equipped with regular weapons and following normal tactical procedures that any human army would use in similar circumstances. The alien commander felt his confusion growing because every civilized species in the galaxy had elite champion warriors who wore advanced personal armor and carried exotic energy weapons and fought individual duels that determined the outcome of military conflicts through skill and honor. He specifically requested that humanity deploy their finest warriors and most advanced combat units and their most exotic weapons systems so the evaluation could properly assess their true military capability rather than wasting time with these primitive mass infantry tactics. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Turner received orders to demonstrate advanced human military capabilities, and she coordinated with various unit commanders to show the aliens what humans called combined arms operations, where different types of forces worked together in coordinated attacks. The aliens watched through their sensors as human tanks and artillery and aircraft and infantry all moved together in carefully planned operations that involved precise timing and communication and mutual support that created effects far greater than the sum of individual parts. Sergeant. First Class. Ben Carter led his squad through what humans called fire and movement tactics, where some soldiers provided covering fire while others advanced, and then the roles switched in continuous coordination that kept the enemy targets under constant pressure. The holographic battlefield became a complex demonstration of human tactical doctrine, where ordinary soldiers with basic weapons achieved objectives through teamwork and planning and logistics rather than individual heroics, and exotic technology fleet commander Veltar demanded to speak directly with the human military leadership because he could not understand why they continued to deploy regular troops instead of their champion warriors, and he needed answers about their true military structure. General Hayes explained that what the aliens were observing was indeed humanity's standard military approach, and that humans did not rely on individual champions, but rather trained entire populations to fight as coordinated armies using mass production weapons and industrial logistics. The concept horrified the alien observers because it meant that humans treated warfare as a large-scale industrial process rather than a contest between elite warriors, and this approach violated every principle of civilized galactic combat doctrine. Subcommander Thexra reported that the humans kept using disturbing terms like mass production and standardized equipment and training programs and logistical systems that suggested they could create military forces on a scale that no galactic civilization had ever contemplated. Major Steve Collins demonstrated what humans called tactical retreats, where military units would withdraw under pressure while maintaining coordination, and defensive fire, and then regroup for counterattacks which seemed like cowardly behavior to aliens accustomed to honorable single combat. The alien evaluation team began to realize that human military thinking was fundamentally different from galactic norms, and instead of producing small numbers of elite champions with advanced equipment, they focused on creating large numbers of competent soldiers with reliable weapons. Admiral Helen Wright joined the communication channel and explained that the demonstration forces represented less than 1% of humanity's total military personnel, and that every human nation maintained standing armies with millions of trained soldiers ready for immediate deployment. This revelation shocked the alien observers because most galactic species had military forces numbering in the hundreds or low thousands, and the concept of millions of soldiers was beyond their understanding of how civilized warfare should be conducted. The humans continued their tactical demonstrations and showed the aliens concepts like suppressing fire and covering advances and flanking maneuvers and concentrated firepower, and all of these techniques relied on multiple soldiers working together rather than individual. Skill Fleet Commander Veltar requested detailed information about human military organization and received reports that described armies divided into units, with names like divisions and brigades and battalions and companies and squads that contained specific numbers of soldiers with assigned roles. The organizational complexity was staggering compared to galactic military structures that usually consisted of small groups of elite champions with advanced equipment, and the humans seemed to have created a system for managing military forces on an unprecedented scale. Defense Secretary Patricia Kim transmitted additional information about human military doctrine and explained that their approach to warfare emphasized overwhelming firepower and tactical flexibility and logistical sustainability rather than individual combat prowess. The aliens learned that humans practiced something called total war, where entire civilizations could be mobilized for military purposes and civilian industries, could be converted to weapons production, and entire populations could be trained for combat operations. This concept was so alien to galactic thinking that the evaluation team struggled to understand how a species could organize warfare on such a massive scale and still maintain social stability and economic productivity. Colonel Sarah Mitchell demonstrated human logistics capabilities by showing how military units could be supplied and maintained and reinforced across vast distances, using supply chains and transportation networks that kept armies functioning far from their home bases. The demonstration revealed that humans had developed systems for supporting military operations that were more complex and efficient than anything the Galactic Council had ever encountered, and this logistical capability enabled them to sustain large-scale warfare indefinitely. Admiral James Parker explained human strategic doctrine and described concepts like strategic bombing and naval blockades, and combined operations that involved multiple service branches working together to achieve military objectives through coordinated campaigns. The aliens realized with growing alarm that they were not observing a primitive species with basic military capabilities, but rather a civilization that had developed warfare into a science and could potentially field military forces larger than the combined armies of several galactic civilizations. Fleet Commander Veltar transmitted an emergency report to the Galactic Council, warning that humanity represented a completely new type of military threat that did not fit any existing evaluation categories and required immediate attention from the highest levels of galactic government. Captain Jake Morrison received a priority transmission from Fleet Commander Veltar requesting clarification about the scope of human military demonstrations and asking for specific details about the total size and capability of Earth's armed forces. The alien commander seemed confused about human military organization and kept asking questions about where humanity was hiding their elite champion warriors and why they continued to deploy what appeared to be ordinary soldiers instead of their most advanced combat units. Morrison forwarded the request to General Hayes, who consulted with military leaders from every major nation on Earth, and they decided that the aliens needed to understand the true scale of human military capability, rather than continuing to assume that the demonstration represented humanity's full strength. The decision was made to provide the Galactic Council evaluation team with accurate information about Earth's total military assets and personnel and industrial capacity. So there would be no misunderstanding about human defensive capabilities. Major Steve Collins began coordinating with military commands across Earth to compile comprehensive data about human armed forces, and the numbers quickly became staggering even by human standards when viewed as a combined planetary military capability. Admiral Helen Wright transmitted the initial report to the alien fleet and explained that the demonstration forces they had been observing represented approximately 2% of Earth's immediately available military personnel, and that much larger forces could be mobilized if necessary. The alien response was immediate and panicked as Fleet Commander Veltar demanded confirmation of the numbers, because no galactic civilization had ever maintained military forces numbering in the millions, and the concept seemed impossible to organize. And Supply General Hayes authorized the release of detailed organizational charts that showed how human military forces were structured with clear command hierarchies and logistical systems and training programs that could maintain and deploy massive armies across multiple theaters of operation. The aliens learned that humanity had developed something called reserve forces, which consisted of millions of additional soldiers who maintained their training while pursuing civilian occupations and could be activated for military service within days or weeks. This concept was completely foreign to galactic military thinking because most species maintained small professional military units and had no capacity for rapid expansion of their armed forces beyond their existing elite champion warriors and support personnel defense secretary, Patricia. Kim provided additional information about human military production capabilities and explained that Earth maintained weapons factories and vehicle manufacturing plants and equipment production facilities that could rapidly increase output during military emergencies. Sub-Commander Thexra reported that the humans possessed something called strategic reserves, which included stockpiled weapons and ammunition, and supplies sufficient to support large-scale military operations for extended periods without requiring immediate resupply. The evaluation team began to understand that human military planning operated on completely different assumptions about the nature of warfare, and instead of preparing for small-scale conflicts between elite units, they seemed ready for massive prolonged campaigns. Admiral Wright explained that human military doctrine included concepts like multiple theaters of operation, where different armies could fight simultaneous campaigns in various locations, while maintaining coordination and mutual support through advanced communication systems. Secretary of Defense William Stone joined the communication channel and authorized the release of classified information about Earth's total war production potential, which could convert civilian manufacturing capacity to military purposes within months. The aliens received reports about human industrial capabilities that included automobile factories that could produce tanks and aircraft manufacturers, that could increase fighter plane production and shipyards, that could build naval vessels and electronics companies, that could manufacture military communications. Equipment Fleet Commander Veltar transmitted urgent requests for confirmation, because the industrial capacity report suggested that humanity could potentially outproduce the combined military manufacturing of several galactic civilizations working together. The evaluation team learned that humans had developed standardized weapons and equipment designs that allowed for mass production using interchangeable parts and automated manufacturing processes that could produce military hardware at unprecedented rates. Colonel Ryan Brooks demonstrated human mobilization capabilities by showing how civilian transportation networks could be converted to military logistics and how civilian personnel could be rapidly trained for military support roles. The aliens discovered that humanity had created something called a military-industrial complex, where civilian companies maintain the capability to switch from consumer goods production to weapons manufacturing and could scale up military production almost instantly. President Robert Taylor was briefed on the alien evaluation and authorized the release of information about America's military capabilities as an example of what a single human nation could deploy for defensive purposes. The president explained that the United States maintained active-duty military forces numbering in the hundreds of thousands with additional reserve and National Guard units that could double or triple that number, and similar forces existed in dozens of other human nations. Admiral James Parker provided details about human naval capabilities, which included aircraft carriers and submarines and destroyers and support vessels that could project military power across Earth's oceans and potentially into space with modifications. The aliens learned that humans had developed concepts like global logistics networks that could supply military operations anywhere on their planet, and potentially beyond using cargo ships and transport aircraft and supply depots. Major Collins transmitted information about human air power, which included thousands of fighter aircraft and bombers and transport planes and helicopters that could provide close air support and strategic bombing and rapid troop deployment. The evaluation team received reports about human ground forces that included armored divisions with tanks and artillery and mechanized infantry and engineering units and special operations forces, and all of these units were equipped with standardized weapons and vehicles. Fleet Commander Veltar realized with growing horror that What humanity considered a small demonstration represented more military capability than most galactic civilizations possessed in their entire armed forces. The alien commander transmitted an emergency message to the Galactic Council reporting that humanity appeared to possess military forces that could potentially challenge multiple galactic civilizations simultaneously and represented a completely unprecedented threat level. Sub-Commander Thexra compiled the final evaluation report, which concluded that human military doctrine was based on principles of mass warfare and industrial production that could potentially overwhelm traditional galactic military forces through sheer numbers and logistical sustainability. Fleet Commander Veltar made what would later be remembered as the most catastrophic decision in Galactic Council evaluation history when he requested that humanity demonstrate their war production capability because the aliens needed to understand how humans could maintain such large military forces. General Hayes consulted with Secretary of Defense William Stone, who contacted President Robert Taylor, and after a brief discussion, they authorized a limited demonstration of human industrial capacity that would show the aliens how Earth's manufacturing systems could support military operations. The decision sent shockwaves through human government and military leadership because demonstrating true industrial war production would reveal capabilities that most nations preferred to keep classified. But the consensus was that the aliens needed to understand human defensive potential. Colonel Sarah Mitchell received orders to coordinate with civilian manufacturing companies across Earth, and within 6 hours, factories in dozens of countries began converting their production lines from consumer goods to military equipment using protocols developed during previous global conflicts. The alien observers watched through their advanced sensors as human industrial facilities transformed themselves with shocking speed, and automotive plants started producing armored vehicles, and electronics manufacturers began making military communications equipment and civilian shipyards. Converted to military vessel construction, Sub-Commander Thexra reported that the scale of human industrial conversion was unlike anything in galactic history because most civilized species relied on small, specialized facilities to produce limited quantities of advanced weapons rather than massive factories churning out thousands of standardized items. Admiral James Parker transmitted technical specifications to the alien fleet showing how human industrial capacity could be measured in terms of raw material consumption and energy usage and production output that dwarfed anything the Galactic Council had previously encountered. The aliens learned that humanity had developed something called surge production, where civilian factories could rapidly increase output by adding additional shifts and workforce and raw materials to meet emergency military requirements. Major Steve Collins demonstrated how human transportation networks could support industrial warfare by showing how railroads and highways and shipping routes could move vast quantities of raw materials and finished products to support military production on a continental scale. Fleet Commander Veltar requested specific numbers about human production capacity and received reports that Earth's combined industrial output could potentially produce thousands of tanks and aircraft and ships and millions of weapons and tons of ammunition per month. The alien evaluation team began to understand that human warfare was not limited by the availability of advanced champions or exotic weapons, but rather by the raw industrial capacity to produce equipment and the population available to operate military systems. Defense Secretary Stone explained that human military planning included concepts like total mobilization, where entire national economies could be converted to support warfare, and civilian populations could be organized to support military production and logistics. The aliens received detailed reports about human resource extraction capabilities, which included mining operations and oil production and agricultural systems and manufacturing infrastructure that could sustain massive military forces for years without external support. Colonel Mitchell coordinated demonstrations where human factories produced complete weapons systems from raw materials in time periods that seemed impossible to the alien observers who were accustomed to advanced but slow energy-based Manufacturing processes. The evaluation team learned that humans had developed standardization protocols that allowed different factories to produce interchangeable parts for the same weapon systems, and this meant that production could be distributed across multiple facilities and countries. Admiral Helen Wright explained how human logistics networks could distribute military equipment from production facilities to combat units using cargo ships and transport aircraft and truck convoys and railway systems that operated continuously. The aliens discovered that humanity possessed something called strategic stockpiles, which included raw materials and energy resources and manufacturing equipment stored in secure locations to ensure continued production, even if some facilities were damaged or destroyed. President Taylor authorized the release of historical data about human industrial warfare during previous global conflicts, and the aliens learned that Earth had already demonstrated the ability to convert entire continental economies to military production. The historical reports showed that humans had previously produced hundreds of thousands of military vehicles and millions of weapons and vast quantities of ammunition and supplies during conflicts that lasted for multiple years. Fleet Commander Veltar realized that human industrial capacity represented a form of military power that the Galactic Council had never encountered, because most species relied on limited production of advanced equipment rather than mass manufacturing of reliable systems. The alien commander transmitted emergency reports to the Council, warning that humanity possessed industrial warfare capabilities that could potentially outproduce and overwhelm traditional galactic military forces through sheer manufacturing volume. Sub-Commander Thexera compiled data showing that human production rates for basic military equipment exceeded the total manufacturing capacity of several minor galactic civilizations combined. And this was during peacetime conditions. The evaluation team learned that humans had developed concepts like dispersed production, where military manufacturing could be spread across thousands of small facilities, making it nearly impossible to completely destroy their industrial capacity. Secretary Stone explained that human military doctrine included plans for escalating production in response to threats, and the demonstration they were observing represented only a tiny fraction of Earth's potential wartime manufacturing capability. The aliens received reports about human research and development capabilities, which included university systems and private companies and government laboratories that could rapidly develop new weapons and equipment designs for mass production. Admiral Parker demonstrated how human industrial systems could adapt existing civilian technologies for military purposes and showed examples of commercial vehicles being converted to military use and civilian electronics being modified for battlefield applications. The evaluation concluded with the terrifying realization that humanity had essentially industrialized warfare to a degree that no galactic civilization had ever achieved, and their production capacity could potentially sustain military operations that would exhaust traditional galactic forces. Fleet Commander Veltar transmitted a final emergency report to the Galactic Council stating that humanity represented an existential threat to the established galactic order and required immediate diplomatic engagement to prevent potential military confrontation. Ambassador Zex Thul called an emergency session of the Galactic Council after receiving Fleet Commander Veltar's reports about human military capabilities, and the council chambers filled with representatives from hundreds of species who had never encountered anything like the threat assessment data. The emergency meeting began with Sub-Commander Thexera presenting the evaluation findings to the assembled council members, and the holographic displays showed human military organization, charts and production capacity reports, and industrial warfare capabilities that left the chamber in stunned silence. Council member Kira Len from the Crystalline Collective was the first to speak, and she expressed disbelief that any species could organize warfare on the scale that humanity had demonstrated during their brief evaluation period. The data showed that humans did not fight with small groups of elite champions using advanced personal weapons, but instead fielded massive, coordinated, armies supported by industrial production systems that could manufacture military equipment faster than most galactic civilizations could use. Ambassador Zex Thul reviewed the reports about human military doctrine and realized that the Galactic Council had made a fundamental error in assuming that all species would follow traditional patterns of limited warfare between elite units. The evaluation revealed that humanity had developed concepts like total war and mass mobilization and industrial surge production that were completely foreign to galactic military thinking and represented potential threats that no existing defense protocols could address. Fleet Commander Veltar transmitted his final recommendations to the Council and stated that humanity should be granted immediate membership with full diplomatic status and alliance protections, because any attempt to restrict or threaten them could result in catastrophic consequences. The Council members began debating the unprecedented situation because their standard procedures had no provisions for dealing with a species whose military capabilities exceeded those of established galactic civilizations. President Robert Taylor and General Hayes were invited to address the Galactic Council through holographic transmission, and they appeared in the chamber surrounded by curious alien representatives who had never seen humans before. President Taylor spoke in simple diplomatic language and explained that humanity sought peaceful membership in the galactic community and had no aggressive intentions toward any established civilizations or territories. Council member Kira Len nervously asked about human peaceful intentions and whether Earth would be willing to accept restrictions on their military expansion and industrial development to ensure galactic stability. The president responded calmly that the military capabilities demonstrated during the evaluation represented less than 5% of humanity's total potential, and that Earth maintained much larger forces and production capacity that had not been revealed to the alien observers. This statement sent shockwaves through the council chamber because the assembled representatives realized that what they had, considered an overwhelming display of military power, was merely a tiny sample of human defensive capabilities. General Hayes explained that human military planning included scenarios for defending Earth against potential alien threats, and that planetary defense forces could be mobilized within hours if humanity faced external aggression. The general also mentioned that Earth maintained space-based defense systems and orbital manufacturing facilities and asteroid mining operations that could support military operations beyond the home planet if necessary. Ambassador Zexathul asked direct questions about human military intentions and whether Earth planned to expand their territory or interfere with established galactic trade routes and political boundaries. President Taylor assured the Council that humanity preferred peaceful exploration and scientific cooperation and trade relationships, but would defend themselves aggressively if threatened by any galactic powers. The president also explained that human political systems were based on concepts like national sovereignty and democratic governance that required civilian control of military forces, and this meant that Earth's armies would only be used for defensive purposes. Council members began discussing the implications of human membership and realized that traditional galactic military balance would be permanently altered by the addition of a species with unprecedented industrial warfare capabilities. The debate continued for several hours as representatives tried to understand how galactic civilization could accommodate a species whose military doctrine was based on mass production and overwhelming firepower rather than elite champions and advanced technology fleet. Commander Veltar provided additional testimony about human tactical innovations and explained that their combined arms doctrine and logistics systems and coordinated operations represented completely new approaches to warfare. The Council learned that humans had developed military strategies that could potentially defeat traditional galactic forces through superior numbers and sustained production rather than technological advantages. Ambassador Zexthul called for a formal vote on human membership, and the result was unanimous approval because every council member understood that rejecting humanity could provoke exactly the kind of military confrontation they wanted to avoid. the final Council resolution granted Earth full membership, with immediate effect, and included provisions for human participation in galactic trade and scientific cooperation and diplomatic exchanges. President Taylor thanked the Council for their decision and assured them that humanity looked forward to peaceful relations with all galactic civilizations and would contribute positively to the galactic community. The emergency session concluded with private agreements among Council members to never provoke or threaten humanity and to ensure that all galactic civilizations understood the importance of maintaining friendly relations with Earth Council member Kira Lin, transmitted confidential warnings to major galactic powers stating that humanity should be treated as a potential ally rather than a threat, and that any aggressive actions toward Earth could result in military responses that would overwhelm traditional galactic defenses. The final evaluation reports were classified at the highest levels of galactic government, and only senior Council members were allowed access to the full details of human military capabilities. Ambassador Zexthul concluded the emergency session by noting that the Galactic Council had just welcomed the most militarily powerful species in recorded galactic history, and that this would mark the beginning of a new era in interstellar relations. The Council members departed with the understanding that they had just witnessed the end of traditional galactic military doctrine and the beginning of an age where human concepts of industrial warfare and mass mobilization would reshape interstellar civilization.